Yesterday, we watched Zoran Mamdani pull off what everyone thought was impossible. He didn't just win New York, he flipped it upside down overnight. But that was only the beginning, because the moment he stepped on stage and revealed what he actually plans to do, it sent shockwaves far beyond the city limits. Within hours, Trump himself jumped in, warning that what's happening in New York could spread faster than anyone realizes. And now, we're watching a collision course unfold, a radical new vision for America's biggest city, and a former president who's not about to let it happen without a fight. So today, let's dig into what Zoran really revealed, why Trump's response was immediate, and what this battle means for you and the future of America. I've watched a lot of political campaigns over the years. Some surprise you, some disappoint you, but very few genuinely shock you. Zoran Mamdani's victory in New York City, that was a shock. Not just because he won, though beating Cuomo by double digits is no small feat, but because of what happened the moment the cameras turned on for his victory speech. For months, Mamdani had been out there campaigning as the soft-spoken, reasonable, democratic socialist, kind of like your polite neighbor who happens to have some unusual ideas about redistribution but seems harmless enough. He'd smile, talk about helping working families, acknowledge his socialist leanings, but frame it all in this non-threatening, almost academic way. Then he won, and it was like watching someone take off a mask. The speech he gave that night wasn't a celebration. It was a declaration against capitalism, against the American system, against everything that made New York the financial capital of the world. He stood up there and told millions of people that the system that allowed someone like Donald Trump to accumulate wealth and power needed to be dismantled, not reformed, not adjusted, but torn down entirely. He said the way to terrify someone like Trump is to destroy the very conditions that let him rise in the first place. Now think about that for a second. He's not talking about better regulations or closing tax loopholes. He's talking about fundamentally changing the rules of the game so that becoming wealthy is no longer possible. That's not policy tweaking, that's revolution. And the crowd? They ate it up. You could hear the cheers echoing through the room as he promised a new age in America, one where government controls everything, where private property is suspect, where the promise that you can work hard and build something for yourself and your family is replaced with the promise that government will take care of all your problems, big and small. If you've lived through the Cold War, you've heard this song before. The melody might be a little different, the instruments might have changed, but the lyrics are hauntingly familiar. Here's what struck me most, though. Zoran didn't just talk about policy, he talked about identity. He said New York would remain a city of immigrants, built by immigrants, powered by immigrants, and now, as of that night, led by an immigrant. And he was very deliberate with his words. He didn't say a city of Americans or a nation of citizens. He said immigrants, over and over again. Now, I'm an immigrant myself. I came to this country because I believed in what it represented. Freedom, opportunity, the chance to build something that matters. But here's the thing, I didn't come here to stay South African. I came here to become American. There's a difference, and it's not a small one. When you come to a new country and you refuse to assimilate, when you refuse to adopt the values and culture that made that place worth moving to in the first place, you're not immigrating, you're colonizing. You're bringing your old world with you and imposing it on your new home. And that's exactly what Zoran seems to be advocating for. He listed off all these different nationalities: Yemeni bodega owners, Mexican grandmothers, Senegalese taxi drivers, Uzbek nurses, Trinidadian cooks, Ethiopian aunties. And, look, I love diversity as much as anyone. Different perspectives make us stronger. Different experiences spark innovation. But notice what's missing from that list: Americans. He never once acknowledged the people who were born here, who built the city over generations, who have deep roots in the community. It's like they don't exist in his vision of New York. That's not inclusion. That's replacement. And when you replace a common identity with a patchwork of separate tribal identities, you don't get a stronger society. You get a more fragmented one. You get people who live in the same city but inhabit completely different worlds, with no shared language or values to hold them together. And here's where it gets really interesting. Within hours of that speech, Trump fired back. 4 words: and so it begins. That's it. Short, blunt, ominous. And then he followed up by making it crystal clear that if Zoran tries to interfere with federal immigration enforcement, he'll have him arrested. Not as a political opponent, but as someone obstructing the law. Now, you might think that sounds extreme, but here's what Trump understands that a lot of people miss. This isn't just about one mayor in one city. It's about whether we're going to have a country with borders and laws that mean something, or whether we're going to let local politicians nullify federal authority whenever it suits their ideology. If a mayor can stand up and say, I don't care what the federal government says, I'm not going to let them enforce immigration law in my city, what's to stop another mayor from saying, I don't care what the federal government says, I'm not going to let them collect taxes here, or I'm not going to recognize federal court rulings? You see where this goes, right? You end up with chaos. You end up with a country that's a country in name only. But let's zoom out for a minute, because this story isn't just about Zoran or Trump. It's about something much bigger. It's about why someone like Zoran could win in the first place. And to understand that, we need to talk about economics. Here's the uncomfortable truth. A lot of young people are struggling. And I mean really struggling. Not in the way every generation struggles when they're starting out. I'm talking about structural problems that make the American dream feel like a cruel joke. Right now, the median age of a first-time homebuyer in America is around 40 years old. 40. When I was young, people were buying their first homes in their mid-20s. They were starting families, building equity, planting roots. Now, people are stuck renting into middle age, watching housing prices climb faster than their wages, feeling like they're on a treadmill that keeps speeding up while they're just trying not to fall off. Student loan debt has exploded. We're talking about amounts in the range of $1.5 to $2 trillion nationally, and it's not just the total that's scary, it's the default rate. Credit card delinquencies are spiking too, hitting levels we haven't seen since the financial crisis over a decade ago. People are maxing out their cards just to cover basic expenses, then falling behind on payments, then getting buried under interest rates that would make a loan shark blush. And it's not because this generation is lazy or entitled. It's because the system has fundamentally changed. Wages haven't kept pace with the cost of living. Benefits have been stripped away. Job security is a relic of the past. The social contract that said work hard, play by the rules, and you'll be able to build a decent life has been shredded. So when someone like Zoran comes along and says, the system is rigged against you, and I'm going to tear it down and build something better, a lot of people listen. They're desperate. They're angry. They're looking for someone to blame and someone to save them. Now, here's where I think people are making a huge mistake. They're diagnosing the problem correctly, but prescribing the wrong cure. The problem isn't capitalism. The problem is that we've stopped practicing real capitalism. We've created this crony system where big corporations lobby for regulations that protect them from competition, where banks get bailed out when they make stupid bets, where the well-connected get rich while everyone else fights for scraps. Real capitalism is about competition. It's about anyone with a good idea and the willingness to work hard being able to start a business and succeed. It's about failure being a real possibility, which is what makes success meaningful. It's about government setting basic rules and then getting out of the way. What we have now, it's this weird hybrid where government picks winners and losers, where entire industries are protected from disruption, where the tax code is so complicated that only the wealthy can afford to hire lawyers to exploit it. That's not capitalism. That's something closer to feudalism. And here's the thing about the socialist solution that Zoran is selling. It doesn't fix any of that. It makes it worse. Because when you concentrate all the power in government, when you make government the solver of every problem big and small, you don't eliminate corruption and cronyism. You just move it. Instead of corporations lobbying for favorable regulations, you get bureaucrats deciding who gets resources and who doesn't. Instead of competing for customers, companies compete for political favor. And the ordinary person? They're even more powerless than before, because now there's no alternative. There's no option to start your own business and compete. The government is the only game in town. Look at Venezuela. 20 years ago, it was the richest country in South America. Oil wealth, natural resources. educated population. Then they elected a socialist government that promised to redistribute wealth and create equality. You know what happened? Hyperinflation, food shortages, millions of people fleeing to neighboring countries. The economy didn't just shrink, it collapsed. And the people who suffered the most weren't the rich. They got their money out. It was the working class, the people the government claimed to be helping, who ended up starving. That's not a scare tactic, that's history. And if we forget history, we're doomed to repeat it. But here's what makes Zoran's rise even more concerning. There's money behind this. Big money. Serious influence. This isn't some grassroots movement that bubbled up organically from the streets of Brooklyn. Within minutes of Zoran's victory, Alex Soros, the son and heir to George Soros's massive political empire, posted a photo with Zoran, celebrating the win and calling it the continuation of the American dream. Now, I'm not one for conspiracy theories, but when someone with access to billions of dollars in political funding is publicly celebrating a socialist victory and calling it a dream come true, you have to ask, what's the end game here? Because it's not about helping working people. People with that kind of wealth don't get excited about redistributing it. They get excited about reshaping systems in ways that benefit them. And that's what this is really about. It's about power, who has it, who wants it, and what they're willing to do to get it. Zoran talks about dismantling the system that allows people to accumulate wealth and power, but he's not talking about dismantling power itself. He's talking about redirecting it, away from markets and individuals, and into the hands of government, which means into his hands and the hands of people who think like him. That's not liberation, that's consolidation. Think about it this way. If you wanted to control a city, what would be the most effective way to do it? You could try to control every business, every transaction, every interaction, but that's exhausting and inefficient. Much easier to just control the government and then use the government to control everything else. That's what centralized power looks like. And that's what Zoran is building toward. And the scariest part? A lot of people are cheering for it. Because they're hurting. Because they're desperate. Because they've been sold a story that says their suffering is someone else's fault, and if we just punish the right people and redistribute the right resources, everything will be okay. But it won't. Because you can't build prosperity by tearing down the people who create it. You can't make everyone richer by making rich people poorer. Wealth isn't a pie where one person's slice means less for everyone else. Wealth is created, it grows, and it grows fastest when people are free to innovate, to take risks, to fail, and try again. When you kill that freedom, you kill growth. And when growth stops, everyone suffers. Not equally, by the way. The people at the top, the government officials, the well-connected elites, they'll be fine. It's everyone else who gets crushed. So when Zoran says there's no problem too big or too small for government to solve, what he's really saying is, trust us with everything. Give us control over every aspect of your life, and we promise we'll take care of you. But here's the question you should be asking. What happens when that government decides you're the problem? History gives us plenty of examples. In the Soviet Union, if you were too successful as a farmer, you were labeled a kulak and sent to a labor camp. In Mao's China, if you were educated or owned property, you were declared an enemy of the people during the Cultural Revolution. In Cambodia, under the Khmer Rouge, wearing glasses was enough to get you killed because it meant you might be an intellectual. I'm not saying Zoran Mamdani is planning genocide. I'm saying that when you build a system where government has unlimited power to solve unlimited problems, you create the conditions where abuse becomes inevitable, because power doesn't stay pure. It corrupts. And the people who seek that kind of power are rarely the ones you want having it. Let's think about this from a different angle. Imagine you're designing a computer system. You could create one central processor that handles everything, every calculation, every function, every decision. Sounds efficient, right? Single point of control. No confusion about who's in charge. But here's what happens. That single processor becomes a bottleneck. It can't handle the complexity of millions of simultaneous operations. It slows down. It makes errors. And when it fails, not if, but when the entire system crashes, everything stops working at once. That's why modern systems are decentralized. Distributed processing, multiple nodes making decisions independently, coordinating through protocols but not controlled by any single authority. It's messier, It's less neat and tidy, but it's resilient. When one part fails, the rest keeps working. The system adapts and survives. That's what free markets are. Distributed decision-making. Millions of people making choices about what to buy, what to sell, what to invest in, what risks to take. No central planner can possibly have enough information to make all those decisions well. But a million individuals, acting on their own knowledge and incentives, can collectively solve problems that no bureaucracy ever could. When Zoran says government should solve every problem, he's arguing for that single processor model. He's saying, trust us to know better than you what you need, what you should do, how you should live. And maybe he means well. Maybe he genuinely believes he's going to help people. But good intentions don't change the math. Centralized control fails. It always has. It always will. The question is, how much damage does it do before people realize it's not working? Now, while all this is playing out in New York, Trump is fighting his own battle over control and authority, and it's happening in the Supreme Court, of all places. The issue? Whether the president has the legal authority to impose sweeping tariffs on other countries without Congress approving every single one. This might sound like boring legal stuff, but it's actually critical. Because if the court rules that Trump overstepped his authority, it doesn't just affect tariffs. It affects the entire economic strategy his administration has been pursuing. The plan to bring manufacturing back to America, to reduce dependence on China, to rebuild the industrial base that we've been hollowing out for decades. All of that relies on being able to respond quickly to economic threats without waiting for Congress to debate and negotiate for months or years. The argument from the other side is about separation of powers. Congress is supposed to control trade policy, they say. The president is overreaching. And look, I understand that concern. Checks and balances matter. Limiting executive power matters. But here's the thing. Congress has already delegated a lot of this authority to the president through laws passed decades ago. The question isn't whether the president has power, it's whether Congress can take it back easily, or whether that power, once given, is hard to reclaim. One of the justices made a fascinating point during the oral arguments. He said something like, once Congress gives power to the president, and the president signs that law giving himself more power, which of course every president will do, how does Congress ever get it back? You need a supermajority to override a veto. What president is going to voluntarily give up authority? It's a ratchet effect. Power flows in one direction. And that's a problem, whether we're talking about economic policy or social policy or anything else. Because concentrated power, even when it's used for goals you agree with, creates vulnerabilities. It creates opportunities for abuse. It makes the system fragile. The market odds right now suggest the court is leaning against Trump on this, something in the range of a 75-80% chance they rule that he exceeded his authority. If that happens, not only does Trump have to find new legal justification for his trade policies, but Treasury might have to refund hundreds of billions of dollars in tariffs already collected. That's not pocket change. That's real money that could destabilize the entire federal budget. And here's where it connects back to Zoran. Both of them, in very different ways, are testing the limits of executive power. Trump is trying to reshape America's relationship with the rest of the world through trade policy. Zoran is trying to reshape America's largest city through ideological revolution. Both believe the old rules don't apply anymore. Both believe the situation is urgent enough to justify extraordinary measures. The difference is in what they're trying to build. Trump, whatever you think of his methods, is trying to strengthen American industry and American sovereignty. He's trying to make the country less dependent on rivals and more self-sufficient. Zoran is trying to tear down the structures that made America powerful in the first place. He's not trying to reform capitalism. He's trying to replace it. And the people of New York? They're about to find out what that replacement looks like. Because here's what happens when you elect someone who promises to dramatically raise taxes on the wealthy and on businesses. They leave. It's not a threat. It's not a negotiation tactic. It's just math. When the cost of operating in a place exceeds the benefit, you move. And the wealthy have options. They can live anywhere. They can move their businesses anywhere. They're not trapped. You know who is trapped? Working families, people with kids in local schools. people with aging parents who can't be uprooted, people with jobs that tie them to a specific location. They are the ones who are stuck when the tax base collapses and city services get cut and the whole infrastructure starts to crumble. We've seen this before. In the 1,970 seconds, New York City nearly went bankrupt. Crime was out of control. Businesses were fleeing. The federal government had to step in to prevent total collapse. It took decades to recover. And now, we might be watching the beginning of that cycle again. Some people will say I'm being too pessimistic. They'll say Zoran won't actually implement the radical policies he talked about in that victory speech. Politicians say extreme things on the campaign trail and then govern from the center, right? Maybe. But I wouldn't bet on it. Because the thing about true believers is that they actually believe. They're not cynical operators saying whatever gets them elected. They have a vision, and they think that vision is righteous. They think they're on the right side of history. And that makes them dangerous, because they'll pursue their goals even when the evidence shows it's not working. Look at the exit polls from the election. Among people who were actually born in New York City, the vote was almost evenly split. Nearly half of native New Yorkers voted against Zoran. The people who knew the city best, who had the deepest roots there, who understood what made it work, they were skeptical. So who put him over the top? Recent arrivals. People who came to New York in the last few years. People who don't have a deep connection to the city's history or culture. People who see it as a blank slate for whatever vision they want to project onto it. That's the power of demographic change. When you import large numbers of people in a short time, you change the political culture. You change what's possible. You change what voters will accept. And if those new arrivals are coming from places with very different political traditions, places where strong central government and limited individual freedom are the norm, they're going to vote for politicians who promise to create that same system here. That's not xenophobia. That's not racism. That's just acknowledging reality. Culture matters. Values matter. And if you don't actively work to integrate newcomers into the existing culture, to teach them why American values of individual liberty and limited government and free enterprise are worth preserving, you'll lose that culture. It'll dissolve, and something else will take its place. Zoran understands this better than most people realize. That's why his victory speech focused so heavily on identity. He wasn't just celebrating immigrants. He was telling them, you don't need to become American. You can stay exactly who you are, keep your own cultural identity, and now you'll be running the city. This is your city now, not theirs. That's a seductive message, especially for people who might feel like outsiders, who struggle with the language or the customs or the pace of American life. It tells them they don't have to adapt. They don't have to change. They can reshape America to fit them, rather than the other way around. But here's what that message misses. America wasn't great by accident. The prosperity, the freedom, the opportunity that drew millions of immigrants here over centuries, those things emerged from specific values and specific institutions. Limited government, property rights, rule of law, free speech, religious tolerance. These aren't arbitrary choices. They're the foundation of everything that works. When you discard those foundations because you think they're tainted by the people who built them, you don't get to keep the prosperity they created. You lose that too. The whole structure comes down. So what's the path forward? How do we navigate this moment when two competing visions of America are colliding with more force than any time since maybe the 1,960 seconds? I think it starts with being honest about what's at stake. This isn't just normal political disagreement. This isn't Democrats versus Republicans arguing over tax rates or healthcare policy. This is a fundamental question about what kind of country we want to be. Do we want a country where individuals are free to succeed or fail based on their own choices, their own efforts, their own talents? Or do we want a country where government controls outcomes, redistributes resources, and promises to keep everyone safe and comfortable at the cost of their freedom? Do we want a country where anyone, regardless of where they come from, can adopt American values and become American? Or do we want a collection of tribal identities, each maintaining their own separate culture, competing for resources and political power, with no common bond holding them together? These aren't easy questions, and There's no solution that makes everyone happy. But I do know this. The American experiment, this idea that you can have a large, diverse, prosperous society built on individual liberty, is rare in human history. Most societies throughout most of history have been ruled by kings, or warlords, or tribal chiefs, or communist parties, or theocrats. The idea that ordinary people can govern themselves, that they don't need a powerful central authority telling them what to do, that free people making free choices will create better outcomes than any planned system, that idea is precious, and it's fragile. It's fragile because it requires trust. Trust that your neighbors, even when they disagree with you, are operating in good faith. Trust that the system, even when it produces outcomes you don't like, is fundamentally fair. Trust that if you work hard and play by the rules, you'll have a shot at a good life. When that trust breaks down, people look for alternatives. They look for strongmen who promise to protect them. They look for ideologues who promise to punish their enemies. They stop believing in the system and start believing in tribes and factions and zero-sum competition. That's where we are right now. Trust is breaking down, and people like Zoran are offering a very clear alternative. Give us power, and we'll take care of you. We'll punish the people you're angry at. We'll redistribute wealth from them to you. We'll create a new system that's fair and just and equitable. It sounds good. Especially if you're struggling. Especially if you feel like the current system isn't working for you. But here's what I learned from building companies and trying to solve hard problems. There are no shortcuts. You can't redistribute your way to prosperity. You can't legislate equality of outcomes. You can't make everyone happy by making some people miserable. What you can do is create conditions where people are free to build, to create, to solve problems, to help each other voluntarily rather than through force. You can create a system that rewards innovation and hard work. You can create a culture that values excellence and responsibility and community. That's harder than just promising free stuff and villainizing successful people. It requires patience. It requires believing that people are fundamentally capable of making their own choices and living with the consequences. It requires accepting that life isn't fair, but freedom gives you the best chance to improve your circumstances. Zoran's vision is easier to sell. It's emotionally satisfying. It gives people someone to blame and someone to save them. But it doesn't work. It's never worked. And it won't work in New York, no matter how much passion and conviction he brings to it. The question is, how much damage gets done before enough people realize that? How many businesses leave? How many jobs disappear? How much does the tax base shrink before the city can't provide basic services anymore? How bad does it have to get before people admit the experiment failed? I don't know, but I do know this. We're all watching. What happens in New York over the next few months and years is going to reverberate across the country. If Zoran succeeds, if he actually manages to reshape the city along socialist lines without complete collapse, then other cities will try it. Other politicians will run on the same platform. The movement will grow. But if he fails, if New York becomes a cautionary tale, if people see in real time what happens when you tear down capitalism without having anything better to replace it with, then maybe, just maybe, we can have a real conversation about how to fix what's broken without destroying what works. So here's my advice, especially to those of you who've lived long enough to see political fashions come and go. Pay attention, watch what actually happens, not just what politicians promise. Look at the data, look at where businesses are moving, where people are moving, what's happening to crime rates and school quality and infrastructure. Don't let anyone tell you that your concerns are bigoted or that your questions are illegitimate. You've earned the right to be skeptical. You've seen enough to know that utopian promises usually lead to dystopian realities. And most importantly, don't give up on the idea that ordinary people, given freedom and opportunity, can build extraordinary things. That's the American story. That's what made this country a beacon for the world. That's worth fighting for, even when it's hard, even when it's messy, even when it seems like the forces of centralization and control are winning. Because at the end of the day, this isn't about Zoran or Trump or any individual politician. It's about whether we believe in ourselves, in our capacity to solve our own problems, to care for our own communities, to build our own futures without needing a powerful government to direct every aspect of our lives. That belief, That faith in human potential and human freedom is what's really at stake. And losing that would be a far greater tragedy than any single election or any single policy failure. So let's keep paying attention. Let's keep asking hard questions. Let's keep believing that a better future is possible, not through revolutionary transformation, but through steady, patient work to make the system we have work better for more people. The choice between capitalism and control, between freedom and security, between individual responsibility and collective management, that choice is never final. Every generation has to make it again. And right now, it's our turn. If you found this breakdown helpful, make sure to like this video and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss future updates as this story continues to unfold. Share this with someone who needs to understand what's really happening in New York and what it means for the rest of the country. And drop a comment below with your thoughts. I'd love to hear your perspective, especially if you've lived through similar